Oops. That was all she said. My daughter-in-law watched my birthday cake hit the patio stones, frosting splattering across 68 years of my life, and she just smiled and kept walking like she was stepping over a crack in the sidewalk. So I walked over to her lawn chair, picked up that designer bag she never shut up about, and I dropped it straight into the fire pit. My son came flying across the yard screaming, "Are you out of your mind? You are going to pay for that." And I looked at him, calm as a Sunday morning, and I said, "Send me the bill, Preston. But first, go ask your wife why she thought my home was hers to wreck." The leather curled up black and the whole yard went dead silent. My name is Adelaide Kavanaugh. Everybody calls me Della. I am 68 years old. I was a high school principal for 31 years, and that fire was the last thing those people ever took from me. If you are listening from somewhere far away, drop your city in the comments. And please, stay with me until the end, because here is the thing. This did not start with a cake. A cake is just what it took for me to finally see what had been going on right under my own roof for over a year, and to understand how I got to the point of torching a $2,500 handbag at my own birthday party. You have to back all the way up to before any of it went sideways. You have to understand the house. You have to understand my Everett. And you have to understand the kind of woman I used to be before I let people walk all over me in the one place I was supposed to be safe. Let me start with the house, because in a lot of ways, this whole story is about the house. My husband Everett built most of it with his own two hands, not from scratch. We bought the shell of the place back in 1989 when it was falling apart, and the bank practically begged us to take it off their hands. But everything that made it a home, Everett made. He taught woodshop over at the high school for almost 30 years, the same school where I ran the front office, and eventually the whole building, and that man could not sit still on a weekend to save his life. The kitchen cabinets, he built those. The banister going up the stairs, he turned every single spindle on a lathe out in the garage. The dining table we ate off of for 3 decades. The bookshelves, the little bench by the front door where you sit to pull your boots off. All of it came out of his hands. There is not a room in that house you can stand in without touching something he made. I used to tease him that he was going to fill the place so full of furniture we would have to sleep standing up. He would just grin at me with sawdust in his eyebrows and say, "A house is not walls, Della. A house is the stuff you fill it with love." He passed 3 years ago now. Spring of 2023. Heart just quit on him one Tuesday afternoon out in that garage, right in the middle of sanding a rocking chair he was building for some someday grandbaby. A chair for a child that never did come along while he was alive to rock it. I still have not finished it. It sits out there under a sheet, and I cannot bring myself to touch it, but I also cannot bring myself to give it away. So there it sits. Now, I want to tell you something about myself so you understand how the rest of this goes. 31 years in public schools does something to a person. You develop a habit, and I never could shake mine. In my head, I grade people. I always have. Not out loud. God, no, but somewhere behind my eyes, there is a red pen going the whole time. A kid mouths off to a teacher, "Red pen." A parent screams at me across my desk about a suspension their darling absolutely earned, "Red pen." A young teacher stays 2 hours after the bell to help a struggling reader, big gold star. I ran a building with 1,400 teenagers in it, and you do not survive that unless you can read people fast and grade them honest. My daughter always said it was my worst quality. I think it turned out to be the thing that saved me. So when my son Preston called me up about 14 months ago, I already had a lifetime of practice reading between the lines. Preston is 36. He is my baby, and I love him. And I am going to be honest with you the whole way through this, because there is no point in me sitting here lying to a bunch of strangers on the internet. My son has always been the kind of man who looks for the soft place to land. School was somebody else's fault. Every job that did not work out was some boss who had it in for him. Every girlfriend who left was crazy. Never once was it him. Everett and I bailed him out more times than I can count. And every time we told ourselves it was the last time, and every time it was not. He called me up and said, "Mom, Sable and I have been talking. We are trying to get serious about saving for a down payment, and rent is just killing us. And we were thinking just for a few months, until we get on our feet. And I want you to notice how good that sounds. A few months, on our feet, saving for a house. It is the kind of thing a good mother says yes to without even thinking. And that is exactly what I did. I said, "Of course, honey, the house is too big for one old woman anyway. Come on home." Sable is his wife. She's 33, and I need you to picture her because she is important. Sable has one of those little followings on the internet, the kind where she films herself in coffee shops holding the cup just so, and talks about her aesthetic and her journey and her brand. She is what they call a micro-influencer, which as far as I could ever tell means she gets free lip gloss in the mail in exchange for her dignity. Now, I am not here to run down a young woman for wanting nice things. Lord knows I liked a pretty dress in my day. But there is wanting nice things, and then there is the thing Sable had, which was a bone-deep belief that the world owed her a lifestyle she had not earned, and that everyone around her was basically staff. I clocked it the first week. Red pen. But I bit my tongue, because that is what mothers do. And at the start, it really was not so bad. They stayed up in the guest room. They kept to themselves. Sable was polite in that glossy way that never quite reaches the eyes. I figured, a few months. I can do a few months on my head. A few months came and went. And then something happened that I did not fully understand at the time, but I understand now. Slowly, the house stopped being mine. It started small, the way these things always do. Sable's shampoos and her serums and her heat tools crept into my bathroom. The good one, the one Everett tiled himself. Until one morning I went to brush my teeth, and there was nowhere to set my own toothbrush down. My spices got rearranged so her stuff was up front and mine was shoved in the back. Her ring light and her little tripod took up permanent residence in my living room, and I learned to walk around them like furniture. The thermostat I had set the same way for 20 years started changing on its own because Sable was always too warm or too cold. My own recliner, the one with the groove worn into it that fit me like a glove. I came home from the store one day to find her friends sitting in it filming something for the internet, and nobody so much as looked up when I walked in. Little by little, I became a guest in my own home, and I let it happen. That is the part that still eats at me. I let it happen because I kept telling myself it was temporary, because I did not want to be the difficult mother-in-law, because after Everett died, the house had gotten so quiet that even bad company felt better than the silence. So I swallowed it. Day after day, I swallowed it. And every day, the red pen in my head pressed a little harder into the page. Now, there is one more person you need to meet before we get to the day everything blew up. And she is the one who breaks my heart in this whole story. My granddaughter, Juniper. Everybody calls her June, and she is 16 and she is the best of all of us, which is a funny thing to say about a kid who came out of the two most selfish people I know. June is my daughter Corinne's girl. Corinne lives a couple states over, and her husband Grant has a business that has been circling the drain for years. And about 4 months before the cake, Corinne called me up all breezy and said, "Mom, things are just so hectic right now with Grant's work. Would you mind terribly if June came and stayed with you for a semester? It would be so good for her." And I want you to hear what she was really saying, because I heard it plain even then. She was not sending June to me for June's sake. She was clearing her plate. June was one more thing on a to-do list that Corinne did not have room for, and I was the free babysitter 3 states away who would never say no. Red pen, and it went deep, because that was my grandbaby. She was handing off like a package. But I said yes, because of course I said yes. And June came, quiet as a mouse, with one suitcase and a look on her face like she was used to being in the way. And she moved into the little back bedroom, and something in that too big silent house eased up just a hair, because now there were two of us. June, God bless her, saw things. She was 16 and she was watching all of it, watching how Sable talked to me, watching what was going on in that house, filing it all away behind those quiet eyes. I did not know yet just how much she was seeing. I would find that out later, at the worst and the best possible moment. So that was the house on the morning of my 68th birthday. My son, who never met a free ride he would not take. His wife, who had turned my home into her personal boutique and her personal film set. My granddaughter, dropped off and forgotten by her own mother. And me, Della Kavanaugh, who ran a building with 1,400 kids in it, who never once let a teenager talk down to her, sitting quiet in a corner of the house my husband built, letting a 33-year-old woman with a ring light treat me like the help. I had planned a small little backyard barbecue. Nothing fancy. A few neighbors, some family, and a lemon cake, because lemon was always Everett's favorite, and I had not had the heart for it in 3 years, but this year I wanted it. I had no idea that by the end of that afternoon, I would be standing over a fire pit watching that woman's handbag melt, and finally picking up the red pen for real. But I am getting ahead of myself. Let me tell you about the cake. The morning of the party, I was up before the sun, and for the first time in a long while, I felt something close to good. There is a particular kind of peace in a kitchen at 6 in the morning when nobody else is awake to need anything from you. I zested 3 lemons by hand, the way Everett liked, and the whole kitchen smelled bright and clean. And for about an hour, it was just me and the memory of my husband and the sound of a wooden spoon against a bowl he had turned on his lathe. June wandered in around 7, still in her pajamas, and without a word, she picked up a towel and started drying the bowls I washed. That girl. She never needed to be asked. We did not talk much. We did not have to. And it was the nicest morning I had had in months. Then everybody else woke up, and the house remembered what it had become. Sable came down around 10 with her phone already up, narrating her morning to whoever watches that stuff, talking about how she was so blessed to be spending the day celebrating family. Family. She said it to the camera, and then she looked at me over the top of the phone, like I was a piece of the set that had wandered out of place. And she said, "You are not wearing that, are you, Della?" Not a question, really. Then she went back to her little screen. Red pen, but I let it go. Because it was my birthday, and I was not going to let her have it. People started showing up around noon. A few of the neighbors. The Hendersons from down the street. Coralie from next door, who has been my friend for 30 years and worked over at the town hall her whole life. Coralie took one look at me and one look at Sable, filming herself by the good hydrangeas, and she just squeezed my arm and said low, "You doing okay?" Della, and I said I was fine. And she gave me a look that said she did not believe me for 1 second. Coralie never did buy my fine. And then Elias came. I have to stop and tell you about Elias Brandt, because he matters more than he knew. Elias is 34 now, and he owns the best bakery in 3 counties. But a long time ago, he was just a scrawny 15-year-old kid who was one bad week away from dropping out for good. His daddy was a mean drunk. His grades were in the toilet, and he had already been written up twice for fighting. On paper, he was a lost cause, and I will be honest. There were people in my building ready to write him off. But my Everett got that boy into his woodshop class, and something happened in there. Everett handed him a block of walnut and a chisel and told him, "Son, you can break things, or you can build them. That is about the only choice a man really gets. Now, which are you?" And Elias chose to build. Everett kept him after school, fed him half the time, taught him a trade, and that boy graduated because of my husband and nobody else. He went to culinary school on a scholarship Everett wrote the recommendation for, and he never forgot it. So when Elias walked into my backyard carrying a cake box the size of a car battery, I already had tears standing in my eyes before he opened it. He set it down on the dessert table and he lifted the lid, and inside was the most beautiful lemon cake I have ever seen in my life. 3 layers, candied lemon on top, and piped around the base in Everett's own handwriting, which Elias must have copied off something, were the words, "A house is the stuff you fill it with love." I could not speak. Elias put his big hand on my shoulder and he said, loud enough for the whole yard to hear. Mr. Kavanaugh saved my life, Miss Della. I would be dead or in prison if it were not for that man and this woman right here. So I am not just here for a birthday. I bake for a living because your husband handed me a chisel and told me to build something. This cake is the closest I can come to saying thank you to a dead man. And there was not a dry eye in that yard. Even the Hendersons were sniffling. It was, up until that point, the best moment I had had since I buried my husband. And Sable was standing off to the side the whole time with her arms crossed, tapping one foot, actually rolling her eyes. Because for a solid 4 minutes, the camera was not on her and she could not stand it. We got the food going. Everything was fine for a while. And then it came time to sing, and everyone gathered around that table, and Elias lit the candles. And I stood there in front of a cake with my husband's words written on it in the sunshine, surrounded by people who actually loved me, and I felt whole for the first time in 3 years. That is when Sable decided she needed the bathroom. Now, I need you to understand the geography of it, because I have played this moment over in my head 1,000 times, and I know exactly what happened. There was room. There was a good 4 feet of open patio on the other side of that table, a clear straight shot to the back door. She did not need to come anywhere near the cake, but she got up from her chair, and instead of going the easy way, she came around our side, right through the little crowd of us, and she squeezed in behind the dessert table where there was no reason on this earth for her to be. And as she passed, I watched her elbow come out. I was looking right at her. It was not a stumble. It was not a trip. Her arm came out sideways, deliberate as anything, and she caught that cake right at the base and sent it off the edge of the table. It hit the patio stones face down. Everett's words, all that candied lemon, 3 layers, splattered across the concrete in front of God and everybody. Elias made a sound like he had been punched, and Sable did not stop. She did not even look down. She just kept walking toward the house. And over her shoulder, flat and dry and without 1 ounce of anything human in it, she said, "Oops. I have been in a lot of rooms in my life where something terrible just happened. I have sat with parents on the worst day of their lives. And I know that specific silence, the one where every single person freezes because their brain cannot catch up to what their eyes just saw. That is the silence that fell over my backyard. Nobody moved. Elias was staring at the ruined cake with his fists balled up. June had gone white. Coralie's mouth was open. And me, I felt something in my chest that I had not felt in years. It was not sadness. It was clarity. The red pen, the one I had been pressing into the page for 14 months, finally went all the way through the paper. I did not yell. I did not cry. I have never in my life made a scene. And I did not start then. I just set my napkin down, and I walked calm as you please, over to the lawn chair where Sable had draped that ridiculous handbag she had made sure everyone knew cost more than some people's car payment. I picked it up. It was lighter than I expected. And I walked to the fire pit, the one Everett laid the stones around himself, and I held it out over the flames, and I let go. The leather caught fast. It hissed and blackened and let off this awful chemical stink, and by the time Sable came back out of that bathroom, drawn by the sound of everyone gasping, her precious bag was a curling mess of smoke and melted hardware. She screamed. It was a real scream, the kind you feel in your teeth, and it echoed off every house on the block. And that is when my son came across the yard. Preston came at me red-faced and roaring, and I have already told you what he said. Are you out of your mind? You are going to pay for that. And I have already told you what I said back. I looked my 36-year-old son dead in the eye, and I was as calm as if I were watering my hydrangeas. And I said, "You can send me the bill, Preston. But first, go ask your wife why she decided to destroy my birthday. And if she wants to call the police over a handbag, you go right ahead and let her. Because I would just love to tell them about the intentional destruction of property that has been going on inside this house for over a year. I have pictures." That last part landed. I watched it land on both their faces, because they did not know yet exactly what I meant. But some animal part of them understood that the ground had just shifted. Sable stood there over the smoking ruin of her bag, and Preston stood there with his mouth working and nothing coming out. And the neighbors were already gathering up their things and making the kind of excuses people make when they want to be anywhere else. Within 20 minutes, my backyard was empty except for family and a ruined cake and a fire pit full of somebody's bad decision. Elias was the last to leave. He stopped at the gate and he looked at me, and he did not say anything about the bag. He just said, Mr. Kavanaugh would have done the exact same thing, Miss Della. Then he was gone. I held it together while there were people to hold it together for. I held it together through the cleanup, through Sable's slammed doors, through Preston's muttering. I held it together right up until the sun went down and the house went quiet, and then I did not go to my bedroom. I went out to the garage, to Everett's shop. It still smells like him out there. Sawdust and machine oil and something green underneath it all. His tools are still on the pegboard exactly where he left them, each one traced in pencil so he would always know where it went. That was the kind of man he was. And there in the corner under a bedsheet is that rocking chair he never finished, for a grandbaby that never came while he was alive. I pulled the sheet back and I sat down on his work stool, and I put my hand on that half-sanded armrest, and for the first time since the funeral, I fell apart, completely. I cried the way you cry when nobody can hear you, the ugly kind, and I said out loud to an empty garage, Everett, what do I do? They are eating me alive in the house you built, and I let them. I let them, and I am so tired, and I want to be straight with you, because I promised I would. I sat out there for a long time that night, and part of me, a big part, wanted to just apologize. Write the check, bake another cake, make it all smooth again the way I always had, because that is what I had always done. Keep the peace, keep the peace, keep the peace. I am not some superhero who woke up one day made of steel. I was a tired old widow crying in a garage, seriously wondering if I had gone too far over a handbag. But then I looked at Everett's pegboard, at every tool traced in its place, a whole wall of a man who knew exactly where everything belonged and made sure it stayed there. And I thought about that boy Elias, and what my husband told him. You can break things or you can build them. That is about the only choice a man really gets. I wiped my face. I sat up straight. And somewhere in the dark of that garage, 31 years of principle came back up my spine like a steel rod, one vertebra at a time. I had spent 14 months letting people rearrange my house and my life like I was furniture. That was over. Not with yelling, not with a scene. I do not work that way. I was going to do it the way I ran my building for 3 decades. Methodically, on the record, one consequence at a time. I pulled the sheet back over the rocking chair, and I turned off the light, and I walked back into my house. My house. And I want to tell you, I slept like a baby that night, because for the first time in over a year, I knew exactly what I was going to do in the morning. The morning after the fire, the house still smelled faintly of burnt leather, and I decided that was a good smell to start the day on. It smelled like a decision. I was up early again, but this time I was not baking. I was in my closet, up on the little step stool, pulling down a box I had not touched in a while. See, there is something I have not told you yet, and it is the thing those two never counted on. I had already started keeping records. Not on purpose, not at first. It started maybe 8 months back, when I noticed the first real damage. Everett made a set of 6 dining chairs, spent the better part of a winter on them, and one morning I found one of them with a long, ugly gouge down the leg and a cigarette burn on the seat. And when I asked about it, Sable said she had no idea what I was talking about, and maybe it had always been like that. It had not always been like that. I knew every inch of those chairs. And 31 years of running a building kicked in without me even thinking about it. When a kid did something and lied about it, you did not scream. You documented. Date, time, what happened, photograph if you had one. So that day I took out my phone and I photographed that chair, and I wrote down the date. and I put it in a folder, and I kept doing it. Every time something of Everett's got ruined, every scratch, every ring left by a wet glass on wood he had finished by hand, every broken thing that got blamed on the house being old. I photographed it, and I dated it, and I filed it away. I never said a word. I just built the file. 14 months of it. By the time of the party, I had a folder 2 inches thick, and neither one of them had any idea it existed. That is the thing about people who think you are furniture. They forget furniture has eyes. So the first thing I did that morning, before anybody else was up, was move my documentation somewhere safe. Then I got to work, and I started, as I have told you I would, methodically. I went into the good bathroom, the one Everett tiled, and I got a sturdy cardboard box, and I packed up every single thing in there that belonged to Sable. Every serum, every dropper bottle, every heat tool, every jar of something that cost more than a tank of gas. I did not throw any of it. I am not a vandal, whatever she wanted to tell people. I packed it neat, the way you pack a student's desk when they have been moved out of a classroom, and I carried the box out and set it down right in front of their bedroom door. Then I called a locksmith, a good one, a man whose son I had kept from being expelled 20 years back, and by 10 that morning my bedroom and my bathroom had brand new deadbolts, and I had the only keys. Sable found the box around 11. I heard her out in the hall going through it. And then I heard her try the bathroom door and find it locked. And then I heard her go to Preston. And their voices came up through the floor, low and fast and ugly. I did not go up. I turned on the radio in the kitchen, and I made myself a cup of coffee, and I let them stew. Preston came down about 20 minutes later, and he was doing his big man act, chest out, jaw set, the whole thing. He put both hands flat on the kitchen island and he said, "Mom, this has gone far enough. Sable is really upset. That bag was $2,500, and now you are locking her out of the bathroom like a child. She wants to press charges over the bag, and honestly, I do not know that I can talk her out of it." And this was the moment. This was the one I had been up half the night getting ready for. I took a slow sip of my coffee, and I set the mug down, and I did not raise my voice 1 inch. I said, "Preston, go get your wife. Bring her down here, because I want to say this once, to both of you, and I do not want to have to say it twice." Something in the way I said it made him do it. He went up and he came back down with Sable behind him, and she had her arms crossed and her chin up, and that look on her face like she was already composing the post about it in her head. And I reached down beside my chair and I lifted up that folder and I set it on the island between us. And I opened it. I said, "Sable wants to call the SLIS. Wonderful. Let us call them together. And when they get here, I will show them this." And I started laying the photographs out on the island one at a time, like I was dealing cards. The gouged chair, the cigarette burn, the water rings on the coffee table Everett made, the cracked pane in the china cabinet, the scratch down the banister. 14 months of it, each one with a date written in the corner in my own hand. I laid out maybe 15 of them before I stopped, and there were plenty more in the folder, and they both knew there were more. I said, "Here's what the nice officer is going to see. He is going to see a $2,500 handbag, which, yes, I burned, I will not deny it. I did it in front of a dozen witnesses. And then he is going to see 14 months of deliberate destruction of a widow's property, every piece of it handmade by her late husband, and a documented pattern to go with it. So by all means, honey, you call the police about your purse, and I will file about all of this. And then we will let a judge decide who owes who. I am 69 this coming winter, and I have got nothing but time and a very organized folder. How much time have you two got? I have run enough disciplinary hearings to know exactly what a bluff looks like and exactly what the truth looks like, and I made real sure they could tell the difference." The color went out of Sable's face. Preston looked down at those photographs spread across his mother's kitchen island, at his father's ruined furniture laid out like evidence, and he did not have one single word. Nobody was calling the police. We all understood that now. I gathered the photos back up nice and neat, and I closed the folder, and I said, that will be all. And I went back to my coffee. That was the day the balance of power shifted in that house, and they felt it. But I was not finished, not even close, because the pictures were only the first thing I had been tracking. For over a year, I had been feeding those two. Every grocery run, every dinner, out of my retirement money, because that is what a mother does, and I never once thought about it. Well, I started thinking about it. That afternoon, I moved my own food, my milk, my eggs, the good coffee, into a little mini fridge I bought and put in my bedroom behind that new deadbolt. And I stopped cooking. Just like that. The kitchen was open, the stove worked, but the meals stopped. Next morning, Sable came down expecting breakfast, dropped onto a stool and asked me how long the eggs were going to be, because Preston had some big meeting. I sipped my tea and I said, I have no idea. Sable, I suppose that depends on what time you start cooking them. She opened the big refrigerator and found it mostly empty, and her voice went up an octave. Where is all the food? And I told her the truth. I am a widow, not a maid. Starting today, you two feed yourselves. She started to argue, and then she looked at my face and thought better of it. Good instinct, finally. Now here is where it stopped being about groceries and started being about something a lot worse. Because moving my food made me start thinking about my money. And once I started pulling that thread, the whole thing came apart in my hands. Years back, right after Everett died, I had opened a little convenience account at the bank and put Preston's name on it too. It was an emergency thing, a safety net, so that if something happened to me, if I ended up in a hospital bed and could not sign a check, my son could get at some money to handle things. That was the only reason it existed. Every dollar in it came out of my retirement. And I will admit, I had not looked at it closely in a long while, because who checks the emergency account? That is the whole point of an emergency account. It just sits there. But something had been nagging at me. Little things. Preston always seeming to have cash for things he could not afford. Sable's constant new stuff. So that afternoon I drove down to the bank and I sat across from a personal banker, a kind young woman, and I asked her to print me the statements for that account going back 6 months. And I sat in that little chair with my reading glasses on, and I went down the list line by line, and my stomach just kept dropping. Steakhouses, a spa 2 towns over, 4 separate times, designer boutiques, a charge to a company that turned out to sell Ringsham equipment, on and on, month after month, my retirement money bleeding out to pay for Sable's lifestyle, all of it run through the emergency account my son had access to. By the time I got to the bottom of the last page, close to $22,000 had gone out of that account in 6 months. $22,000 of the money that was supposed to keep me out of a state nursing home when I got old. I felt sick. I felt like a fool. But I kept reading, because there was something at the bottom that did not fit the pattern, and it was the thing that turned my sick feeling into something colder, because it was not all spas and steakhouses. Scattered through those 6 months were 4 transfers, big ones, a few $1,000s each, and they did not go to any boutique. They went out to another account entirely. And I asked the banker, that kind young woman, if she could tell me anything about where those went. And she looked, and she said, it looks like a business account. Ma'am, out of state. And she read me the name. It was Grant's business. My daughter Corinne's husband. The failing business 3 states away. I sat there in that little chair and I felt the whole thing rearrange itself in my head. This was not just Sable draining me for handbags and facials, bad as that was. My son had been quietly funneling my retirement money out of state to bail out my daughter's husband's dying company, which meant Preston and Corinne had talked, which meant my son and my daughter, my 2 children, had gotten on the phone together at some point and worked out a nice little arrangement where Mom's emergency fund became the family slush fund. And nobody ever thought I would notice, because nobody ever thought the old woman was really paying attention. both of them. Not one child betraying me. Both of them, together with their heads bent over my money. I want to tell you I cried in that bank, but I did not. I had done my crying in the garage. Instead, I sat up straight, and I said to that kind young woman, I would like to close this account today. I would like to move the entire remaining balance into an account that has only my name on it, and I would like to cancel the card attached to it, effective right now, this minute. And she said, of course, ma'am. And it took her about 20 minutes. And when I walked out of that bank, the emergency account was gone. The card was dead. And every dollar I had left was somewhere no one could touch but me. I sat in my car in the bank parking lot for a minute before I started it. Not crying, just quiet, thinking about a thing I used to tell brand new teachers on their first day, terrified 22-year-olds who thought the kids were going to eat them alive. I used to tell them, they will take exactly as much as you let them, and not 1 inch less. It is the truest thing I know about teenagers, and it turns out it is the truest thing I know about grown children too. Then I started the car, and I drove home, and I want to tell you I was not even angry anymore. Angry was behind me. I was something much steadier than angry. I was a principal with a full folder and a clear head, and school, as far as I was concerned, was back in session. The card died on a Thursday, and I found out it worked exactly the way I meant it to the very next afternoon. I was out on the patio deadheading Everett's roses, the ones he planted along the back fence the summer we moved in, when my phone rang. It was Preston, and he was whispering, which told me everything before he even got a word out. A man does not whisper into a phone unless he is somewhere he does not want to be overheard. And there is only one reason my son would be whispering to his mother in the middle of a Friday afternoon. Mom, he hissed, and I could hear restaurant sounds behind him, forks and glasses, and somebody laughing at another table. Mom, my card just got declined. I am at Ruggiero's with Sable and two of her brand people, whatever. Some people she is trying to do business with. And I just tried to pay for lunch, and the card got declined in front of all of them. The waiter is standing right here. The bank says the account is closed. Mom, what did you do? You are humiliating me. And I stood there in my garden with the sun on my back and the pruning shears in my hand, and I felt something I had not felt in a long time, which was the specific peace of watching a consequence land exactly where you aimed it. I said, the bank is not lying to you, Preston. That account is closed. I closed it. He said, you cannot just. That is our. We use that. And he was sputtering now, and I could hear panic climbing up under the whisper. I said, no, honey. It was never our account. It was my emergency fund, my retirement money, open so that if I ended up in a hospital, you could pay my bills. Instead, I have got 6 months of bank statements that say you have been using it to buy your wife facials and to wire money out to your sister's husband. So no, there is no more account. There is no more card. And I set the shears down on the little garden table so I could hear him better, because I did not want to miss a word of this. He said, low and mean now, the whisper gone thin. My cards are all maxed out, Mom. I do not have another way to pay for this. What am I supposed to do? And I looked out at Everett's roses, and I said, in the same voice I used to use on a senior who got caught cheating and thought charm would get him out of it, well, Preston, I suppose you have got two choices. You can call one of those brand people over and ask them to spot you for lunch, which is going to be an interesting conversation. Or you can go find the manager, ask him for an apron, and start washing dishes to work it off. Either way, it is a grown man's problem now, and you are a grown man. Enjoy your lunch, sweetheart. And I hung up, and then I turned my phone all the way off, and I poured myself a tall glass of iced tea, and I sat down in the sun, and I drank the whole thing without a single interruption. And I have got to tell you, it was the best glass of tea I have had in my life. Now I know some of you are thinking that was cold. Letting my own boy stand there embarrassed in front of people he was trying to impress. And maybe it was. But I want you to understand something about my son, and it is the thing that took me the longest to learn. Every single time in his life that Preston hit a wall, somebody softened it for him. Everett and me mostly. He never once in 36 years had to feel the full weight of a consequence, because there was always a check, always a bailout, always Mom. And a man who never feels the wall never learns the shape of the room. I was done building him soft walls. If he had to feel one hard one at a table at Ruggiero's, well, that was 36 years overdue. But the account and the card, those were about money. And money was only part of how those two had been living off me. Because there was one more thing they had been treating as theirs that was not theirs at all. And it was the thing that hurt me the most to look at every single morning. The car, out in that garage, next to Everett's workbench, sat his 1968 Chevy. He bought it as a rusted out shell the year Preston was born, and he spent the next 15 years bringing it back to life, evenings and weekends, one part at a time. He rebuilt that engine twice. He tracked down the right trim off a guy in another state. He hand rubbed the paint until you could see your face in it. That car was Everett's heart with 4 wheels under it, and it is mine now, in my name, my title, my registration, my insurance. Everett left it to me plain as day. And somewhere in the last year, without ever once asking me, Preston had started driving it. First it was just to run to the store. Then it was his commute. Then it was chauffeuring Sable around town, saving himself a fortune on gas and wear on his own vehicle. And it just sat in my driveway every night like it belonged to him. And every morning I watched my dead husband's pride and joy pull out of my driveway with my careless son behind the wheel. And I never said a word, because that is the woman I had let myself become. Well, not anymore. That Sunday night, after they had both gone to bed, I went out to the garage in my robe and my slippers, and I sat in that car for a minute in the dark. It still had Everett's smell in it, that same green sawdust smell as the shop. I put my hands on the wheel where his hands used to be, and then I started it up, and I backed it out real quiet, and I drove it the 3 blocks over to Coralie's and pulled it into her empty garage. And she came out in her nightgown, and we got it tucked away, and she pulled the door down. And I walked home in my slippers, with the keys in my robe pocket and the spare key tucked in my fist. And I felt like I had rescued something. Monday morning at 7:30, I was in the kitchen steeping a cup of chamomile when I heard Preston come pounding down the stairs. The front door flew open and slammed shut, and a few seconds later he came storming into the kitchen with his hair every which way. Mom, where is the car? The car is gone. It is not in the driveway. Sable has to be at a thing at 9, and now the car is gone. I blew across the top of my tea. I put it in storage, I said. Storage, he said, like the word did not make sense. What do you mean storage? We need that car. How are we supposed to get anywhere? And I looked at my son, standing in his father's kitchen, demanding his father's car. And I said, real level, that is not your car, Preston. It never was. That is your daddy's Chevy, and it is in my name. And I have been paying the insurance and the gas, so the two of you could ride around town for free. And I am done doing that. There is a bus that stops 3 blocks from here. There is that app on your phone that sends a car right to the door. You are a grown man with a job. You will figure it out, same as everybody else does. He stood there with his mouth opening and closing. Then he turned and ran back up the stairs. And a minute later, I heard Sable start shrieking. And about 10 minutes after that, the two of them came flying out of the house on foot, actually on foot. Sable in heels she could barely walk in. Both of them looking like the world had personally wronged them. Headed for a bus stop neither of them had ever set eyes on. I watched them go from the kitchen window with my tea, and I am not proud of it, but I smiled. That was the morning I got my legs back all the way. And I want you to understand, none of this was about being cruel. Every single thing I took back was mine. My locks, my food, my money, my husband's car. I did not take one thing that belonged to them. I just stopped letting them take what belonged to me. There is a difference, and it is the whole difference in the world. But you cannot cut off a supply like that and not have somebody come looking for where it went. And I knew sooner or later the phone was going to ring, and it was not going to be Preston this time. It rang Wednesday afternoon. Corinne. I let it ring twice while I sat down, because I wanted to be sitting for this one. Then I answered, and my daughter's voice came through all warm and sugary, the voice she uses when she wants something and thinks I do not know it. Mom. Hi. How are you? Listen, Preston called me. He is really upset. He says things have gotten kind of intense over there. I said, did he? And how are you, Corinne? How is Grant's business these days? There was the smallest pause on the line. Just a beat. But I heard it, and she heard me hear it. Then she pushed right past it, because that is my daughter. And she said, Mom, I really think you are overreacting to all this. It was a piece of cake. You cannot burn a girl's handbag and lock people out of bathrooms and take away a car over a piece of cake. It is not. It is not stable, honestly. Just cut Sable a check for the bag, make them some dinner, and let everybody move on. You know how stressed Preston gets. And I let her finish. I have learned that if you just stay quiet, people will always get to the real reason on their own. So I waited. And sure enough, after a little silence, out it came. She said, and Mom, listen, while I have you, things are really tight for us right now, too. It is just a rough patch. Everybody is having one. Grant just needs a little help to get over the hump with the business. I was thinking, I am going to inherit it eventually anyway, so it would not really even be giving it away. If you could just advance me part of it now, 50,000 would do it. It would save Grant's business. And honestly, I could throw a little to Preston too so he can get his own place. And this whole thing just goes away. Everybody is happy. It is a win-win, Mom. And there it was, laid right out on the table, the real reason for the phone call, dressed up like she was doing me a favor. $50,000 of my retirement, an advance on my death, basically, to prop up the exact same failing business I had just watched my son wire my money into behind my back. The two of them, still working it, still convinced that if they just found the right angle, the old woman would open the checkbook the way she always had. I did not raise my voice. I never do. I said, Corinne, there is no advance. There is no inheritance coming early. The money your father and I saved is what is going to keep me out of a nursing home and living in my own house until the day I die. And it is not going to bankroll Grant's business or Preston's apartment or Sable's next handbag. The bank of Mom is closed, sweetheart. It closed the day I looked at 6 months of statements and found out my two children had been passing my retirement back and forth behind my back like it was a Christmas fund. The sugar went right out of her voice then. It always does, the second the money is off the table. She started in, cold now, you are being so selfish. You have all this money just sitting there. We are your children. And I let her go for a second. And then I said, real quiet, you are welcome to come visit me anytime you like, Corinne, as my daughter. But if you are coming as a bill collector, I would Google the hotels near here first. And I hung up. I sat there a while after. Because that one did hurt. I will not pretend it did not. A son is one thing. But to hear it from my daughter too, plain as day, that to both my children I had quietly become a bank account with a pulse. That is a particular kind of lonely, and I felt every bit of it sitting in that quiet kitchen. But I want to tell you what I did next, because it is the part that mattered. I got up. I rinsed out my teacup and set it in the rack. And I went down the hall and I knocked soft on June's door, my granddaughter, the one good thing those two people had managed to make between them. And I said, June, honey, you hungry? And she said yes. And the two of us made grilled cheese sandwiches and ate them standing up at the counter. And we laughed about something. I do not even remember what, because that is the thing nobody tells you about drawing a line. When you finally stop pouring yourself out to the people who were only ever taking, you have got something left over, and you get to pour it somewhere that it actually means something. I did not know it yet, standing there eating grilled cheese with my granddaughter. But June was about to become the most important person in this whole story. And what she had been quietly seeing all those months, with those watchful 16-year-old eyes, was going to blow the whole thing wide open in front of the entire town. The letter from the school district came about 2 weeks after all this. I almost did not open it. I get so much junk in the mail, but something made me slit it open, standing right there at the mailbox. And I had to read it twice before it sank in. The high school, my high school, the one Everett and I gave our whole working lives to, was building a new vocational wing. Woodshop, metalwork, the trades, the hands-on things that they had spent 20 years cutting out of schools and were finally figuring out they should never have cut. And they were naming it. They were naming the whole thing the Everett Kavanaugh Center for the Trades. And there was going to be a dedication ceremony out on the school grounds. And the whole town was invited. And they wanted me, his widow, there in the front row. I stood at my mailbox and I cried right there in the driveway, the good kind of crying this time, because my husband spent 30 years teaching kids that the world had already given up on how to build something with their hands, and half the time nobody thanked him for it. And now they were going to carve his name into the front of a building where kids would learn that same thing for the next 50 years. He would have been so embarrassed by the fuss. He would have loved it and pretended he hated it. I could see his face exactly. I told June that night and her whole face lit up. She had barely known her grandfather. Corinne almost never brought her around when she was little, so June had only met Everett a handful of times before he passed. And I think hearing that a whole town was about to put his name on a building made him real to her in a way my stories never had. She asked me 100 questions about him. I answered every one. It was a good night. I made the mistake of mentioning it at dinner, though. Well, they were not at my dinner. I still was not cooking for them. But I mentioned it in passing to Preston when he asked why I was in a good mood. And I watched Sable's ears prick up from across the room where she was doing something on her phone. And I saw the exact moment her brain turned it into an opportunity. I should have known right then. Because here is what Sable did with the news that the town was honoring my dead husband. She turned it into content. Within a day, she was posting about it. All of a sudden, her feed was full of my grief, except it was her grief now, staged and lit and captioned. A soft focus photo of her looking wistfully at an old picture of Everett she must have found in a drawer, with 3 paragraphs underneath about how caring for her beloved husband's grieving mother had taught her the true meaning of family and sacrifice. She started what she called a series, documenting her journey as a caregiver to her elderly mother-in-law. And people I had never met were commenting about what an angel she was, what a saint. So few young women would take this on. She set up a little fund, a way for her followers to support her caregiving journey, which is to say a way for strangers to send money to a woman who had not made me so much as a cup of coffee in 14 months and had, in point of fact, been draining my accounts the whole time. And she made it very clear she would be at that ceremony. Front and center, the devoted daughter-in-law, publicly grieving a man she never once had a kind word for while he was alive, in front of the whole town and, more importantly, in front of her camera. She even talked, out loud, about maybe saying a few words at the podium, about her connection to Everett, to a man she never met. I found out later June had been watching every bit of this go up online, quietly on her phone in her little back bedroom, watching her aunt turn her dead grandfather into a fundraiser. And something in that girl, that quiet, watchful girl who never made a fuss about anything, decided she had seen enough. The day of the dedication was one of those perfect early fall afternoons, blue sky, a little bite in the air. Half the town turned out. There were folding chairs set up on the lawn in front of the new wing, and a podium, and a big banner with Everett's name on it that was going to come down to reveal the sign carved into the brick. Old students of his came from all over. Elias was there, in a nice jacket, looking like a successful man, which he was. Coralie sat next to me and held my hand. And there in the second row, dressed to the nines, phone already recording on a little tripod she had set up like she owned the place, was Sable, with Preston fidgeting beside her. The principal spoke first, the woman who has my old job now, and she said kind things. Then a couple of Everett's old students got up and told stories, and the crowd laughed and got misty. And Elias got up, and he told the same story he told in my backyard, about a chisel and a block of walnut and a man who told him he could break things or build them. And by the time he finished, there was not a dry eye on that lawn. It was beautiful. It was everything my husband deserved. And then, before the principal could move things along, Sable stood up. She just stood, smoothed her dress, and started walking toward the podium with her chin up and her eyes already finding the camera. And you could see it, the little speech forming, the caregiver, the family, the sacrifice, all of it about to pour out over the whole town, with Everett's name as the backdrop. The principal looked confused. Nobody had put Sable on the program. But Sable does not wait to be put on programs. And that is when my granddaughter stood up. June was small in that crowd, 16 years old in a plain dress, but she stood up right in Sable's path, and she had her own phone in her hand, and she said, in a voice that shook but did not stop, "Excuse me, before she says anything, I have something everybody should see first." The lawn went quiet. Sable froze halfway to the podium, and June, God love her, walked up to that podium herself, and she plugged her phone into the little cord that ran to the big screen they had set up for the slideshow of Everett's life. And she pressed play, and there it was, on a screen 10 feet tall, in front of the whole town. June had made a video, and it was the simplest, most devastating thing I have ever seen. On one side, she had put up Sable's posts, the wistful photos, the captions about sacrifice and caregiving and family, her elderly mother-in-law, my caregiving journey, please support. And then right next to each one, June had put what was actually happening, because June, it turned out, had been recording too. Quiet, watchful June had a phone in her pocket, the same as Sable. And while Sable was filming her fake devotion, June was filming the truth. There was the post about lovingly preparing meals for her mother-in-law, right next to a clip of Sable stepping over me in the kitchen without a word while I made my own dinner alone. There was the caption about the sacrifices of caregiving, next to a clip of Sable on the phone laughing, saying the old bat has no idea. We have got months before she notices anything is gone. There was the angel of the family, next to the audio of the party, of the cake hitting the ground, of that flat little oops. June had it all. 14 months of a lie, laid right next to the truth, on a 10-foot screen, in front of every person that town had. Nobody moved. Nobody breathed. Sable stood there in the middle of that lawn with the whole thing playing across her face, and you could watch the mask come off in real time, watch it slide right off, and underneath there was nothing, just a scared woman who had been caught with the whole town watching. Somebody in the crowd said her name low, and it was not kind. A couple of the followers who had sent money were probably sitting right there. Her hand went to her mouth, and then she did the only thing she had left to do, which was turn and half run, half stumble across that lawn toward the parking lot in her two high heels, with Preston scrambling up after her. And the two of them were gone before the video even finished. And I want to tell you, part of me wanted to stand up and cheer. The old part, the part that had swallowed 14 months of being treated like furniture. That part wanted to whoop out loud on that lawn. But I did not. Because I was looking at June. Because when that video finished, when the screen went dark and Sable was gone, my granddaughter did not look triumphant. She stood up there at that podium in front of the whole town, and her face crumpled, and she started to cry. Not angry crying, the other kind, the kind that comes from a place that has been holding on too long. And I got up out of my front row seat and I went to her as fast as these old legs would carry me. And I got up there and I wrapped her up in my arms right there at the podium in front of everybody. And she said into my shoulder, so quiet only I could hear it, "I did not do it for you, Grandma. I mean, I did. But I did it because nobody in this whole family ever tells the truth. Not Aunt Sable, not Uncle Preston, not Mom. Nobody. Mom dropped me off here like I was a package, and she has called me twice in 4 months, and I saw what Aunt Sable was doing to you, and somebody had to say the true thing out loud. Somebody in this family finally had to. And that broke my heart, because there it was. This was never really only about Sable and her handbag and her lies. It was about a whole family that had learned to take, to angle to work the con, and a 16-year-old girl standing in the middle of it, starving for one single honest thing. My daughter Corinne had done this. My Corinne, who I raised, who I taught better, had made this girl feel like a package, and June had been carrying that all by herself. And Corinne was there. I had not even seen her arrive, but she had driven in for the ceremony, for the optics of it probably. And she was standing at the edge of the crowd, and she had seen the whole thing, seen the video, seen her sister-in-law exposed, and then seen her own daughter sob into her grandmother's shoulder and say out loud to the whole town that her mother dropped her off like a package and called twice in 4 months. And I watched Corinne's face, and for the first time in longer than I could remember, my daughter was not calculating anything. She was not working an angle. She had just watched her own child grieve her out loud while she was still alive. And something in her face broke open that I had not seen since she was a little girl herself. She put her hand over her mouth and she just stood there, and the sugar and the angles and the whole hard shell of her cracked right down the middle. She did not run like Sable did. That is the thing I want you to hold on to about my daughter, because it matters for what comes later. Corinne did not run. She stood there in her broken open face, and she took it. And when the crowd finally started to move and murmur and break up, she came across that lawn, slow, and she stopped a few feet from us, from me and June. And she did not reach for June. She did not have the right, and some part of her knew it. And she just said, in a voice I had not heard from her in 30 years, June, "Baby, I am so sorry. I have been so wrong." June did not go to her. Not yet. She held on to me. But she looked at her mother, really looked, and she did not say anything cruel, and she did not turn away either. And I stood there between my daughter and my granddaughter, on the lawn, in front of my husband's name carved into the brick. And I understood that something had just happened here that was bigger than catching Sable, bigger than any handbag or any account. A true thing had finally been said out loud in this family. And true things, once they are out, you cannot put them back. They just sit there in the open, and they make you decide who you are going to be about them. That night, back at the house, June asked me if she could stay. Not for the semester. For good. She asked if she could just live with me, in the quiet, in the house where somebody finally told the truth. And I thought about her mother's broken open face on that lawn. And I thought this was not the end of Corinne and June. I hope to God it was not. But I also thought that this child had earned the right to choose where she felt safe. So I said yes. Of course I said yes. And I called Corinne, and I braced for a fight. And there was not one. My daughter, quiet on the phone, just said, "Yeah, Mom. Yeah, if that is what she wants. Maybe that is what she needs right now. And maybe I need to earn my way back to her instead of expecting it." And I nearly dropped the phone, because in all her 40 years, I do not think I had ever once heard Corinne say she needed to earn something. It was not everything. It was not fixed. But it was a crack of light in a door that had been shut a long time. And I went to bed that night with my granddaughter safe down the hall, and my husband's name on a building across town, and I thought the hard part was behind me. I was wrong about that, because there was still Preston. And Preston, it turned out, had been quietly working on something all along that was worse than anything Sable ever dreamed up. Sable was gone within a week. Once the town had seen what it had seen, there was nothing left for her in my house. No free rent, no free car, no accounts to drain, and worst of all for a woman like her, no audience that believed her anymore. Her followers had watched an angel turn into a liar on a 10-foot screen, and the internet does not forgive that. It feeds on it. So one afternoon, I heard the suitcase wheels come dragging down the hall, and she came down the stairs loaded up with everything she could carry. And she stopped in the kitchen where I was making tea, clearly waiting for me to say something, to fight, to beg her to stay for the sake of my son's marriage. I just stirred my tea. I looked at her, this woman who had spent 14 months treating me like a piece of the furniture, and I felt nothing at all, which is its own kind of answer. She waited. I stirred. And when she finally understood that there was not going to be a scene, that I was not even going to give her that, her face twisted up and she yanked the front door open and marched out to a car waiting in the driveway, and she never once looked back. I heard later she and Preston were done inside a month. Turns out when you take away the free house and the free car and the free money, there was not a whole lot holding that marriage together. There was not much of anything holding it together. There never had been. And with Sable gone, and the guest room finally empty, I did the thing I had been wanting to do for a year. That room had been Sable's territory the whole time she lived there. She had slowly turned the second biggest bedroom in the house into her own personal boutique and film studio. Racks of clothes, shoeboxes stacked to the ceiling, a wall of ring lights and backdrops, mirrors everywhere. It was the one room in the house that had nothing of Everett in it, because she had stripped it bare and made it entirely her own. So that weekend, with June helping and Coralie coming over to lend a hand, I emptied it out completely. And then the three of us cleaned it top to bottom, and I brought in a big soft rug, and some comfortable chairs, and shelves, Everett's shelves, the ones he built, and I filled them with books. And on the door, I hung a little wooden sign that June helped me pick out. I turned that room into a free tutoring room for the neighborhood kids, the ones whose folks work 2 jobs and cannot afford a tutor, the ones who are one bad semester away from giving up, the Eliases of the world. 3 afternoons a week. My door is open, and any kid who needs help with their reading or their math can come sit in that room and get it, for free from a retired principal who has got nothing but time and 31 years of knowing how to reach a kid the world gave up on. I called it Everett's Room, because that is what my husband did his whole life, and I figured his name should be on more than just a building across town. It should be on a room in his own house where the work actually happens. I tell you this so you understand the difference, because some folks hear this story and they think it is about an old woman getting mean. It is not. I did not close myself off. I closed myself off to the people who were only ever taking, and I opened myself right up to the ones who actually needed something and had no way to pay it back. There is a world of difference between a boundary and a wall. A wall keeps everybody out. A boundary just decides who gets in. And I had finally, at 68 years old, learned to tell the difference. So Sable was gone, and June was safe, and Everett's room was full of kids twice a week, and I thought the story was over. And that is exactly when Coralie called me. Coralie, you remember, worked over at the town hall her whole life, and even in retirement, she still knows everybody, and everybody still tells her everything. And she called me on a Tuesday, and her voice was careful in a way that made me sit down before she even got going. She said, "Della, I need to tell you something, and I need you to stay calm. A friend of mine still works in the county clerk's office, and she called me because a name came across her desk that she recognized. Your name, Della. There is a petition being started for guardianship. Somebody is trying to have you declared." The word she used was incapacitated. "To have a conservator appointed over your affairs. And Della, honey, the person filing it is Preston." I sat there in my kitchen and I did not say anything for a long moment. My son, my baby, the one I closed the account on, the one whose lunch I let get declined, the one I took the car back from. He had gone to a lawyer. And instead of getting a job, instead of growing up, instead of any of the 10,000 honest things a grown man could do, he had decided that the play here, the angle, was to tell a court that his mother had lost her mind, that the same woman who had run a building with 1,400 kids in it, who had caught his wife on a 10-foot screen and closed her accounts to the penny, was incompetent to handle her own affairs. Because if he could get a court to agree, if he could get himself made her guardian, then he could sell the house. My house. The house his father built. That was the whole play. He was going to take Everett's house out from under me by telling a judge I was too far gone to keep it. Burning a handbag. That is a moment of anger. This was cold. This was planned. My son had sat across from a lawyer and calmly plotted to have his own mother declared unfit so he could sell the home she lived in. And you would think that would have destroyed me, and I will not lie. It took the wind clean out of me for about a day. But then something else happened. Because right in the middle of all that, I went out to the garage. I had been meaning to for weeks, to start really cleaning out Everett's shop, to finally deal with it. And I was out there going through the drawers of his workbench, the deep bottom one where he kept the important things, and tucked in the very back. Behind the old warranty cards and the receipts, there was an envelope, my name on the front in his handwriting. Della, and under it, in his careful block letters, the words, "To be opened if you ever start to feel like a guest in your own home." I had to sit down on his work stool. My hands were shaking so bad I could barely get it open. He had written it a couple years before he died. I could tell from the date, and it was not long. My Everett was never a man of many words. He said everything with his hands. But it said this. It said, "Della, if you are reading this, then somebody has made you feel small in the house we built, and I am not there to stand next to you while you handle it. So let me stand next to you now. You've got the biggest heart of anybody I ever met, and the people who love you know it, and the people who do not will use it. And I have watched you give and give your whole life and never once count the cost. I need you to count the cost now. This house is yours, not theirs. Ours became yours the day I left, and there is not a soul on this earth who gets to make you a guest in it. You raised our kids with everything we had, and you did it right. And if they forgot how to stand on their own 2 feet, that is not a debt you owe them for the rest of your life. Draw the line, Della. I know it is not in your nature, but draw it anyway, and know that wherever I am proud of you for it. The house is full of the stuff we filled it with. Do not let anybody empty it out. All my love. Always, Everett." I sat in that garage and I read it 4 times, and I cried until I could not cry anymore. And then something happened that I can only describe as my spine coming all the way back. Because my husband, dead 3 years, had reached across all that time and stood next to me exactly when I needed him. He had not seen the future. He was no fortune teller. He had just known our children and known my heart, and known that a woman who never counts the cost is a woman somebody will eventually try to empty out. He had left me a letter that said the only thing I needed to hear: draw the line. I am proud of you for it. So I did. I did not call the police on Preston, though I could have, and Coralie thought I should. I did not run to a lawyer, though I did quietly make sure my own affairs were locked up tight, and that petition was going nowhere. Because a guardianship case falls apart pretty fast when the supposedly incompetent old woman shows up with 31 years of professional records and a folder 2 inches thick. No, I did it my way. I did it the way I ran my building for 3 decades. I called my son in for the last day of school. He came all soft and nervous, because by then he had figured out that I probably knew, and he had switched from the guardianship play to the wounded son play, doing dishes he was not asked to do, calling me mom in that little voice, bringing up his childhood, waiting for me to melt the way I always had. And one afternoon I called him out to the back patio, out by the fire pit where this whole thing started, and I sat him down, and I did not yell, because I have never once needed to yell. I laid 2 things on the table between us. The first was his father's letter, and I watched him read it, and I watched it hit him, watched him understand that his dead father had known exactly the kind of man he was going to become. And the second thing I laid down was a copy of the guardianship petition, his name on it, his signature, sitting right there next to his father's letter about not letting anybody empty out the house. And I said, real quiet, I know what you tried to do, Preston. You tried to have me declared out of my mind so you could sell your father's house. And I want you to sit here and look at these two pieces of paper next to each other. And I want you to understand that I know exactly who you are now. And I am not confused about it anymore. And I am not going to save you from it. He started to cry. He said he was sorry, that Sable put him up to it, that he was desperate, that he was an idiot, all the things. And you know what? I believe he was sorry, in the way a man is sorry when he finally gets caught. And I told him, gently, because he is still my son and I do love him. I said, I accept that you are sorry, Preston. I do. But being sorry does not change what has to happen next. You have got 2 months. Find a job, find an apartment, and move out of my house. And he looked at me stunned and said, but Sable is gone. I thought, and I stopped him. I said, the problem was never just Sable, honey. Sable is gone and here you are, 36 years old, trying to sell the roof over my head. The problem is that you have spent your whole life treating me like a thing that owes you. Your father saw it. I finally see it. You are a grown man and it is time you built your own life, in your own house. The way your daddy built this one. I love you, but I am done raising you. There was no screaming. There was nothing left to scream about. He just looked at me, and for the first time in his life, he saw that there was no soft place to land, that Mom was not going to catch him, and something in his face changed. And I still hope, that it was the beginning of him finally growing up. 2 months later, he loaded the last of his boxes into a rented truck and handed me his key, and he hugged me and he left. And that was that. That night I lit the fire pit, the same one. I cut myself a thick slice of a lemon cake Elias had made me fresh, 3 layers, and June came out and sat with me, and we did not say much. We did not have to. The house behind us was quiet, not empty quiet, full quiet, Everett's furniture in every room, his letter in my nightstand, his name on the school across town, and on the door of a room down the hall where kids come to learn, his granddaughter safe beside me eating cake in the firelight. The house was finally, all the way, mine again, and it was full of exactly the stuff we filled it with. Corinne calls now, every week. She is driving in twice a month to see June, slow earning it, and it is not fixed, but it is mending. And that is more than I ever thought I would get. Let me leave you with one thing, because I have had a lot of quiet evenings by that fire pit to think it through. People think love means never saying no. I taught school for 31 years, and I learned the opposite. The kindest thing I ever did for a struggling kid was hold a line and mean it. Somewhere along the way, I forgot that with my own children, and I let the word family become the thing they used to open doors that were never theirs. Burning that bag did not make me strong. Sitting here, in a house my Everett built board by board, feeling like I belong in it again, that is the strong part. Boundaries do not break a family. They just turn the lights on, so you can finally see who was ever really family to begin with. My door still opens. It just opens from the inside now.